I just noticed in that video that it was the King James version in the box. At first, I thought that was a nod to all you King James purists who believe there's no other translation of the Bible. And then as I was watching that, I thought, oh, great, but they could twist that and think, well, why is that one buried in the woods and not the ESV where it belongs? So we'll have to give some artistic forgiveness there for everybody. Well, we are kicking off a new series today called Into the Mystery. We're going to spend the next 4 weeks diving into this mystery, the mystery that exists for us in the Christian faith, and the mystery that can be found in creation. Creation, this world that we live in that was spoken into existence by God, that we far too often take for example. I mean, just pause for a moment and think about this beautiful, amazing, complex world that we live in and how amazing it truly is. Think about your fingertips for a moment. There are something like almost 8 billion people in the world, and we believe that there are 8 billion different sets of fingerprints, that there is never a fingerprint that repeats. And that's not just like I have my own set and you have your own, because really the 10 fingertips all have their own different fingerprint. So for those of you who are good at math, if we have 8 billion people in the world, that's almost 80 billion different fingerprints. And some of you are going, see, you longhorn, you can't even do math. But I got you because you're not thinking about all those 9-fingered people or whatever. So there you go. But isn't that amazing that there are more than 80 billion different sets of fingerprints? Yeah, we don't even stop to think about that unless we're watching Law and Order. What about this? At the moment of conception, the fertilized human egg is about the size of a pinhead. Yet it contains 6 billion DNA chemical letters. If we were to write that out, it would be 1,000 books, 500 pages each, printed at lettering so small that you couldn't even read it. And yet all of that information is encoded into the human body at the moment of conception. And yet we don't even stop to think about it. The sun rising, the rain falling. Okay, we think a lot about the rain falling right now where we are. But the sun rising, the rain falling, the human body taking a breath, healing itself. All of this was spoken into existence by our Creator. And yet far too often, even though we can see it and we can touch it and we can study it, it remains a mystery to us. And even though it's a mystery, we take it for granted. So much that we don't understand, so much that we can see and appreciate the beauty of it, and yet we become numb to it, take it for granted, and sometimes lose our sense of wonder about it. Leanne Womack wrote this song called I Hope You Dance. And the lyrics, she writes that, I hope you never lose your sense of wonder, never take one single breath for granted, still feel small when you stand behind or beside the ocean. There is a mystery to creation. There is a mystery to the complexity, the beauty, the amazingness of creation. And for the next 4 weeks, we're gonna dive into it, into this idea of never losing our sense of wonder at the mystery. Dive into this idea that even in the ordinary, maybe especially in the ordinary, we can see God at work in our lives. Because God reveals himself to us through this life, through creation, through the world, through our interaction with other people. He reveals himself to us. That's revelation. Revelation is simply the information about God or from God, revealing the truth about himself, ourselves, and the world around us. That's revelation at the broad level, but there is also natural revelation. Natural revelation is simply the truth about God that can be found by looking at the world around us and at humanity. The author of Psalms 19 writes it this way. He says, it's on your screen, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. They have no speech. They use no words. No sound is heard from them. Yet their voices go out into all the earth, their words to the end of the world. Paul wrote about it in Romans 1. He says, for what can be known about God is plain to them. That is all of creation, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world, spoken into existence in the things that have been made. So we are without excuse in denying a creator. The truth of God can be found in the world around us. If only we would never lose that sense of wonder, that sense of awe at creation and at humanity. You know, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Louisville, Kentucky for a very quick trip, and I had the opportunity to go to this ice cream shop called Graeter's. Anybody from like Ohio or Kentucky or Illinois? Yeah, you know about Graeter's ice cream? Okay, look, I might get my Texas man card removed for saying this. Bluebell is like heavenly, but Graeter's might have been just a little bit better. I mean, it's amazing ice cream. As you can tell, I like ice cream. Anyway, Graeter's ice cream is really good, but we had this opportunity to go to this Graeter's ice cream shop, and it was a busy little place, and it was right next door to this Christian school, and the school had already started, and so, for the year, and when we got there, some of the students were being dismissed after practice and such, and they walked in, and they're just all standing in line while I am, eating my ice cream as fast as humanly possible, and in that moment, I was just struck. I mean, Louisville, Kentucky is not that far away. It's not like it's around the globe or anything, but I was just struck by this line of teenagers that have walked in, and I thought, they look exactly like the teenagers that we might find in Katy, Texas at an ice cream shop. But then I was struck by the fact that not a single one of them looked anything like the other one. They don't look like somebody that's here. I mean, there are 7.9, like I said, almost 8 billion people in the world, and yet we are all different in little ways. Visually, we look at one another, and we can recognize each other just by the way we look. Yes, there are some people that really resemble, other people and movie stars and whatnot, but really, they're all different, and that speaks to the beauty and creativeness of God, that he could make 8 billion people just alive today, and all of us are a little bit different and beautiful and unique in all of our own ways. Our God is creative beyond what we could ever imagine. And the natural order reflects the character of God. God's story is a story of redemption and love, and we see it in nature. You probably know this, but there are certain pine trees that they will not drop their seed until they are exposed to the heat of fire. And so when a forest fire comes in, it's the only thing that will cause these pine trees to drop their seed. So when the fire ravages the forest and there is death and destruction all around, there is also a little redemption story being dropped out of this pine tree so that life can grow anew. and the ash acts as fertilizer for the ground. Even in nature, we see the redemptive story that God is telling us all, that he's calling us to, because our God is a redeemer, and we see it even in nature. Last year, my wife and I had the blessing to travel to Costa Rica to celebrate our anniversary. And we hiked to this place called the Rio Celeste. And it's where these two rivers converge, or actually two streams converge on one another. And the minerals that are unique to each river that mix together form this amazingly blue water as they mix together. I mean, you can look up stream number 1 and it's clear or brown or whatever. Stream number 2, the same thing. But when they come together, it has this amazing blue quality to the water. Surprising anywhere, but especially surprising in the middle of the rainforest, in the middle of the jungle. The locals call it the place where God cleaned off his paintbrush when he was done painting the sky. Our God is an artist beyond any piece of art that we could ever create. And he shows it to us again and again and again in creation. The creative beauty of creation is a mystery, but the only possible answer is God. The only possible answer is a God who surpasses our creativeness, our uniqueness, who surpasses any beauty that we can imagine and speaks it into existence. You know, some would propose that the world and everything that we see in it is just a mathematical likelihood, an equation, a possibility that the odds all finally played out. But when you look at it and you study it just a little bit, you know that even if you take a simple amoeba, that the proteins needed to create that, if they all were to line up all together, it's the same odds as you and I winning the lottery. This is like 2 out of 3 weeks I've talked about the lottery. Look, I'm not proposing gambling. It just works, right? It just works. The likelihood of those proteins coming together in just the right combination at just the right time is the same odds as you and I winning the state lottery. Not once, not twice, but every single week for 80 consecutive years. In mathematics, they call that an impossibility. It's not really possible. The only thing that's going to cause it to align together is a miracle, is a creator. And so all of creation sings and points to and proclaims the fact that there is a creator, and that creator is God. And you and I are blessed to be the pinnacle of his creation, to have been spoken into existence, to be given the responsibility, the privilege of bearing his image, to be given the responsibility to rule and have dominion over the entire creation, every plant, every animal, for our benefit, for our purpose. But then something bad happens. Something broken enters the picture, and we know that as sin. Seemingly what was an interruption to God's perfection. The earth was cursed and humanity was cursed. And now from that point forward, way back in Genesis, all the way to today and until God returns, we live in this brokenness of the world. We are broken and creation is broken. It is as if a mist has settled across the entirety of God's creation, and it has made it difficult to see because the mist obscures the truth about God. The mist obscures the truth about God. Now we know that the mist is simply, real mist, is simply tiny droplets of water that are forming in the atmosphere that make it difficult for us to see. They happen when cooler temperatures reach warmer temperatures. Gas is converted into water and it fills the air and it makes it difficult for us to see. But for us, in the analogy of the mystery of the mist is anything that obscures the truth about God. And since the very beginning of creation, it is sin that obscures the truth about God. So mist is sin. Sin that settles on this world, sin that we do ourselves, sin that we are victim to. And it settles and it obscures our view of God. It obscures the view of the characteristics of God that he is using creation to prove to us. And so when you and I look at the beauty of creation, When we look at the most beautiful imagery we can see, when we see a baby take its first newborn breath, when we see the human body heal itself or perform some incredible feat, when we think about these things, we are only looking at a misty view of what God intended. We're not yet seeing clearly what God intended for us to see. Paul puts it this way in 1 Corinthians. He says, "For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then, one day, face to face. Now I know in part, then one day I will know fully, even as I have been fully known." See, there is a time coming when the mist will be removed. There is a time coming when God will make all things right again, when humanity and creation will be restored to its rightful, pure beauty. And we will be face to face with God, and there will be no no more pain and no more death. We will be healed and have perfect body, and creation will be perfect. And our soul, ourselves, the very essence of who we are, yearns for that day. But for now, we live in the mist. And so Scripture speaks to us about how we are to live in the mist today. And there's plenty of ways that God's truth gets obscured. There's plenty of ways that the mist flows into us. Sometimes it's our own sin, our own brokenness. When we put anything we desire above God, when we put anything that we think is more important than God above God, that is sin. Sin is simply missing the mark. And Romans 23 reminds us that we've all sinned, we've all fallen short of the glory of God. And each and every time we sin, it's like we're turning one of those hazers on in the back and blowing it around, because the truth of what we see about God and what others see in us when we are supposed to reflect God is becoming obscured. And the truth, the reflection of God's image, is harder and harder to see. The truth of God is also obscured by the sin of others. Sometimes it's not our sin, it's their sin. Sometimes it's the pain caused by somebody else. Maybe it's somebody we love, maybe it's somebody we don't even know, but there is sin in this world, and we just don't bring the mist, the obscurity upon ourselves. This broken world does, and when others sin around us, even when they sin against us or sin in our space, that can bring in this mist that obscures the truth of God. It obscures us from seeing God's truth, and it obscures others from seeing it in us. And then the brokenness of the world we live in can also obscure God. Sometimes it's not our brokenness. Sometimes it's not a loved one's brokenness. Some days we're just the statue and not the bird. I was letting that one sit in for a minute. Some of y'all were like, I know what he's talking about. Some of y'all are like, wait, statue, bird, picture a pigeon flying over a statue. We live in a broken, fallen world. And the consequence of living in a broken, fallen world is some days it ain't great. Some days it's terrible. Some days it's hard. And whether it's our sin or somebody else's sin or the sin because we live in a broken world, this life can be tough. And God's truth and who God is can be harder and harder and harder to see. Sometimes it's a mist. And a mist is tiny droplets of water in the air, and we can see pretty far, and we can kind of see that the world still exists outside and beyond the mist, and we can hold on to it because it's misty, but it's not really yet foggy. And sometimes the fog rolls in, and visibility gets really, really low. And though we are firmly planted on the ground, we can only see what's right there in front of us. We can't see anything beyond that. And so we are losing more and more and more of who God is. So sometimes you're just walking through a little mist and it's a little hard to see. And sometimes you're walking through a fog, and though your feet are planted firmly on the ground, you don't see anything else. You don't see any of the other truth of God. And sometimes we're in a storm. And a storm is where we can't see and our feet are no longer firmly on the ground. Rather, we are being tossed to and fro, and we don't know what side is up and what side is down, and we can't see anything, and we have lost all sight of who God is and his character and his truth, and we are lost and in a dangerous storm. whether it's a mist, a fog, or a storm, so often in life, we, believers and non-believers, find ourselves unable to see the truth of God. The question is not, will you ever be in a mist or a fog or a storm? The question is simply, are you there right now? Because we'll all enter that. We'll all go through it. We'll all be in these periods of life where we can't see the truth of God, and we desperately want to. We desperately cling to it. We desire it, but we're losing sight. And the longer we're in the mist or the fog or being thrown about by the storm, the easier and easier it is to forget the truth of God and who He is. And then in the brokenness of this world, that usually just drives us to more sin and sin around us and the brokenness of the world. And so the mist doesn't naturally part. It doesn't get easier to see. It piles in and it piles in, and the storm gets worse, and we are tossed around and we are lost. And the question is not, will you go there? It's when will you be there? And yet our God is so faithful, because Scripture teaches to this very point time and time again. But today we're going to look at the story of Mark chapter 4. And we see this in 3 of the Gospels. We don't see it in John, but we're going to look at the version in Mark chapter 4. So it'll be on your screen. Follow along with me. Mark 4 says, "On that day, when evening had come, He, Jesus, said to them, 'Let's go across to the other side.' And leaving the crowd, they took Him with them in the boat, just as He was. And other boats were with them. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat, so that the boat was already filling." This is Jesus getting on a boat with His disciples in the Sea of Galilee, and they are traveling. The Sea of Galilee is about 700 feet below sea level. The hills around it they peak out at about 1,400 feet above sea level. That's a 2,100 foot difference in elevation. And what that means is the winds tend to rush off of those hills and down into the Sea of Galilee. And in a moment's notice, violent storms can just spring up without any type of warning. And boats are tossed to and fro. It is a dangerous situation. It's not a little storm. It's a dangerous situation where people's life is on the line because of these violent storms that arise. And this is where the disciples find themselves. They are in a storm. They fear for their lives. And we're going to find out that they can't see clearly, but God can. Mark continues, "But He was in the stern, asleep on the cushion." That's Jesus. "And they woke Him and said to Him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' And He awoke. And He rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' And the wind ceased, and there was great calm. He said to them, 'Why are you still afraid? Have you still no faith?' And they were filled with great fear and said to one another, 'Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey Him?'" Some great stuff in this story. Jesus is asleep. Mark adds the detail that He was asleep on a cushion, because God ain't going to sleep on a bench with no cushion. Somebody gave Him a cushion. But see, we think that when our vision is obscured, when our truth about God is obscured, when we are going through the storm, we start to tell ourselves lies that either God doesn't know we're in a storm, or He doesn't care, and that's why He's asleep on a cushion. We can forget His promise that He is always with us, that the rivers will not overwhelm us, nor will the fire burn us. But this story shows that God is paying attention all the time, and He does care. He wakes up at a moment's notice, questions the disciples, and speaks the storm to go away. God is never asleep at the wheel. We just lose sight that He's in control. It also teaches that faith is greater than fear. Jesus doesn't say they shouldn't be afraid. He never said, "Why are you scared? This isn't a storm, suck it up, pull your pants on," or whatever. No, what He questions is I'm gonna get in trouble for that one. I didn't say underwear. I didn't say panties, so there you go. I did now. Oh, great. All right, so number one, how dare you put the King James Version in the ground like that? Number two, What are you talking about? All right, I'm just kidding. Faith is greater than fear. Jesus doesn't say they shouldn't be afraid. He recognizes that there is danger in the storm. But his question, what are you afraid of? Where is your faith? Paraphrasing, it points to the truth that faith is always greater than fear. And when we have faith, fear gets driven out. Our faith in God means that even though we deserve to be afraid or it is worthy of being afraid of, when we have faith in God, fear has no place. And then Jesus spoke 3 words, peace, be still. Peace, be still. And in a breath, the seas were calm. The storms may cause us to fear. We may feel out of control. We may feel that all is lost, but God is never out of control. The earth and everything in it is his and under his control all the time. Had their faith been stronger, had their faith matured, they wouldn't have doubted for their safety in the midst of the storm. They wouldn't have worried about not being able to see or being tossed to and fro. The truth would have been just as hard to see, but faith would have driven out fear and pointed to God. There's another thing to take away out of this story, is that the disciples were there. Because sometimes we tell ourselves this lie, right? When we're in the mist and it's hard to see the truth, or we're in the fog and we can't see anything, or we're in the storm and we're being tossed to and fro and back and forth, that this is not where we belong and something must have been wrong and or God must have abandoned us and this is not what we were supposed to go through. But the disciples were there. They were part of this storm. They were experiencing it. Because we will all experience these times when the truth of God is obscured, and that is when our faith grows most. So don't forget the lesson that can be found in the storm. The lesson is have faith in God and know that he is in control, and then your faith will grow and be stronger and stronger. Because when the truth is obscured, faith brings clarity. When the truth is obscured, faith brings clarity. The mystery of the mist is that when the truth is hard to see, when we are blinded, when we are tossed around, faith in God helps us to see clearly. So when your marriage is beyond repair, faith tells you differently. When your marriage is over, faith tells you differently that your life is over. When you've lost a spouse to death and you are in the despair of grief, faith tells you that there is hope on the other side. When doors slam shut on you, when you can't see the path to your future, faith tells you that there is a way, that God is a way maker. Paul gives us a little insight to living by faith. He says in 2 Corinthians 1:8, he's speaking to the Corinthian church, and he says, for we don't want you to be unaware of the affliction we experienced in Asia, for we were so, listen, utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. That paints a pretty bad picture. Whatever it was that Paul had experienced in Asia, it was not good. It was beyond a mist, beyond a fog. It was a storm. He was utterly burdened beyond our strength, and they felt that they had received the sentence of death. And this is his opening words to the Corinthian church in 2 Corinthians. 4 chapters later, he speaks this: we don't lose heart, talking about himself. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. Now listen to how he describes the affliction. For this light and momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Chapter 1, it's affliction beyond what he can bear on his own strength. It's a death sentence. Chapter 4, it's a light and momentary affliction. It's not a different thing that he was going through. It's the same pain that he faced that he was referencing. What's the difference? The difference is Paul started walking by faith. And he was teaching the Corinthian church that when you walk by faith, the affliction doesn't lessen, but you start to walk confidently because you remember who God is. Paul is telling us in the midst of the mist, we live by faith. In the midst of the mist, we I knew I was gonna mess it up. In the midst of the mist, we live by faith. Look at the next verse. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. See, Paul is telling us, you're going through a storm, you're walking through a fog, you're in a mist, and the truth of God is becoming obscured to you. Your circumstances are starting to appear bigger than your God. He's saying, don't focus on those, what you can see, rather focus on the unseen, God that you cannot see, and those severe burdens with a death sentence all of a sudden become momentary and light afflictions because you are setting your eyes on the eternal, not this world. Paul says, focus on what you can't see, God, the eternal, and turn away from the consequences. For we walk by faith, not by sight. That's Paul, 1 Corinthians 5, verse 7, that writing to the same church. He's talking to the church about himself and the disciples who are carrying forth the gospel. It is an encouragement to us, but it is descriptive of Paul. For we walk by faith, not by sight. We don't look at what we can see. We look at our God who is bigger than all. We don't look at the mist that obscures the truth of God. We look at the clarity that faith brings us. We don't look at the storm that's all around us. We look at the clarity that faith brings us. We walk by faith and not by sight. So let me give you 3 ways that you can do that. First of all, live by faith by trusting without knowing all the answers. Terrible. Terrible. Live by faith without knowing all the answers. Isaiah says this. He says, for as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. It's God speaking in Isaiah, writing it. Listen again. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God is telling us, you can't comprehend it like I can. You're not gonna know all the answers. And how often do we say to God, hey, listen, God, I will get through this. I will go where you tell me to go. I will do whatever, but you got to write it down and put it on a billboard. But if you would, then I'll do it. Just make it uber clear that where I'm supposed to go, and then I'm going to get in line. But the truth is that God says, hey, your ways are not my ways. My thoughts are so much higher than your thoughts. I don't want you to know the step-by-step path. I want you to follow by faith and not by sight. And I want you to walk where I call you to walk. Frederick Buechner, he's an American theologian, says faith is a journey without maps. And part of our availability to God and to others is a willingness to walk in the paradox of life's uncertainties, to be content with living the questions without knowing all the answers. Faith is being content without knowing all the answers. Faith is trusting in God without knowing all the answers. Faith is being willing to believe the truth of God even when it's getting harder and harder to see. Second of all, live by faith by surrendering to God. Live by faith by surrendering to God. You know, if we were to flip back to the Old Testament, Genesis 12, we would find this story of this man who was 75 years old. He had no kids. And God speaks to him and says, hey, I want you to leave everything you know. I want you to leave your entire support system. I want you to leave your father's land. And I want you to head out to the place I've got for you. That's it. Leave everything you know, you're 75, you have no children, pick up and go. I'm not gonna tell you where, I'm not gonna tell you how, I'm just telling you, get your stuff and go. There's no billboard there. And then God has the audacity, if you will, to make this promise to this 75-year-old man and say, you are gonna be the father of many nations. You are going to be successful, and people, I'm paraphrasing, will revere you, and you will have a high esteem, all because you are going to surrender to what I'm telling you to do. Now pick up and go. And Genesis 12 tells us that Abram, who would later be renamed Abraham, picks up and goes because he lived a life fully surrendered to God. He didn't know the path. He didn't have a billboard. He just picked up, surrendered his will, surrendered his desire, and he went. A life that's lived in this mist, a life that is lived in the fog and the storm. If we are to walk by faith and the clarity that faith brings and not by sight, we have to live a life surrendered to God. And a life by faith, by standing on God's promises. You know, God is immutable. His promises, or rather his character, doesn't change. His will for us does not change, and therefore his promises don't change. He is faithful and reliable. And so when you and I stand on the promises of God found in Scripture, we cannot be defeated. Because we're standing on promises that don't fail. And when we stand on promises that don't fail, we stand on the promises of God, then we can't fail. We have to stand in this life, in this sinful, broken world until Jesus returns. A world where we make mistakes and we sin and people around us sin, and it all brings it into us where it's foggy and misty and stormy and we can't see, and we are left to stand by faith on the promises of God. Luke chapter 1 is the story of Jesus' birth. I don't talk about this much except for Christmas time. Y'all wish it was Christmas time. It's gonna be like 95 today. But in that, we see the story of two births and the angel announcing two different births. The first one, he speaks to Zechariah and he says, "You're gonna be given a child." He's like, "No, I'm not. I'm old. That ain't gonna work." And then the angel mutes him for a period of time because he doubted. And this is an angel that just got done saying, "I stand in the presence of God. You know who I am. I stand in the presence of God, and this is what's about to happen to you." And he didn't stand on the promises of God. He said, "That ain't right. That's not gonna happen." And he was muted. Same angel appears to Mary. And as you probably know, her situation was a little different. She wasn't old, but she was a virgin. And the angel said to Mary, "You're gonna have a child." And Mary's response is a response that stood on the promise of God. She said, "Okay. I don't know how this will be, but okay. I believe you because you're God and you've spoken. And when I can't see, when I am blinded to the truth, when I am lost in the fog, when the storm is all around me, I'll stand on your promises and I'll surrender to you. And I will walk by faith and not by sight because you are God. You are always God. You will always be God, no matter the storm I find myself in." And from that point on, we as God's people have the opportunity to echo that claim. We have the opportunity to walk that out every day. In the midst of the mist, we walk by faith. So will you stand with me? And we are gonna sing today, one people with one voice of God's faithfulness. Because God was faithful then, He is faithful now, and He will be faithful forevermore.